I'm Eve Turro, writer, eater, traveler. An innovative culture of brewing and distilling has arrived in New York City. I'm going to explore it all and introduce you to the people making the drinks so many of us enjoy and attempt to make today. Join me for the ride here on In the Spirit. This week, I subwayed up to the shores of Astoria to Singlecut Beersmiths, a lager-focused operation owned by native New Yorker Rich Bhutia. There, I met with assistant brewer Brian Dwyer.
You told me earlier that you're a journalist.
I was a journalist. Yeah, I'm very clearly no longer a journalist.
Okay, so how did that transition happen?
I was a journalist living abroad in India, and there's only about 3 different beers in India. So in the 9 months that I spent there, I ended up drinking Kingfisher, which is basically the Budweiser there.
Right.
Kingfisher is also an airline, so that kind of puts in perspective how the beer is. And then when I moved back to Brooklyn, all of a sudden there were all these craft beers available. So I got really obsessed really quickly and got interested in brewing my own beer. And that's kind of how my own path happened was, I got into beer because there wasn't a great selection of beer.
So I asked Brian to show me how Singlecut makes their beer, including their most raved about John Olympic White Lager.
And that one's really interesting because it's a wheat beer, but most wheat beers are ales. This is a lager. And we use coriander, orange peel, and the big one, Szechuan peppercorns. Adds a nice spice and vibrancy to the beer.
I've heard rumors of matzo meal going into this beer.
Rumors are true. There is matzo meal. It adds a toasty, bready note to it. Kind of balances it out really nicely.
Yes, I mean, how do you think of that? You're like, oh, Szechuan peppercorns and matzo meal. That's perfect for my brew.
Our first customer, Queen's Kickshaw, does an event every Christmas. One of the owners is Jewish, the other is Chinese, so they do an event in the spirit of serving Chinese food for Christmas for those people who don't celebrate Christmas. So we wanted to create a beer that had both those Jewish influences and Chinese influences. We were the first technical microbrewery to open up since Prohibition.
Do you know what the brewing history was exactly?
Queens and the rest of New York City had a really rich brewing history before Prohibition, and it's something that was really stamped out.
Before I left, I asked Brian to show me what he was working on next, a sour beer. What exactly is a sour beer? Besides the fact that it's a beer and it's sour.
That's pretty much it. A sour beer is what people like to call a wild beer. So it uses, other than regular yeast strains, ale, lager yeast strains, it'll use wild yeast, which are yeast that work kind of slowly, but they give really weird, funky flavor. Funky means a lot of things, but it's a good way to describe sour beers.
Yeah. So earlier I was smelling this.
Yeah.
It smells like pop or soda for anyone not familiar. How'd you come up with this?
This is something I started working on in my kitchen, actually. Okay. My little apartment. Brewers create the beer that they want to drink. So this is a kind of beer that I really like. It's a little bit of a hard to find beer, but that's why I wanted to make it.
Look at how
so
thick
that's
is.
pretty yeasty.
Oh.
It's not going to be this thick when it's done. It'll be very clear, but this is the yeast still doing its thing. When it starts out, all that liquid it's super sweet, and that's what the yeast does. It will convert that into some alcohol and some nice crispness.
To taste the sour beer and many other funky original brews, head out to Singlecut Beersmiths in Astoria, Queens.